Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Marketing Live for Thursday, November the 30th, 2017. I'm Rob Zinkin. I serve as Associate Vice President for Marketing at Indiana University. Today's episode is all about breaking silos. Our colleges and universities are organized into functional silos, but our audiences view the institution holistically. So what do? How can we begin to break down these silos, and how can technology help in doing so? We'll find out today. But first, a reminder that Marketing Live is part of the Higher Ed Live network. Our episodes offer you direct access to the best and brightest minds in education and beyond. As always, we invite you to be a part of our live broadcast with your comments and your questions. You can participate in today's discussion by tweeting us using the Higher Ed Live hashtag. All of our episodes are free and easy to access in the video archives at higheredlive.com, or take Higher Ed Live with you on the go by subscribing to the podcast. Higher Ed Live is produced by M. Stoner. Are you looking to improve your institution's digital marketing strategy and execution? To be successful, today's higher ed marketer must make data-driven decisions and connect digital performance back to strategic and financial goals. Educate your entire team in the latest digital marketing strategies and trends coming up next week on December 6th during M. Stoner's Digital Marketing for Higher Education online conference. We'll be tweeting out a link shortly so you can learn more about that opportunity. And it's great to partner with Funnelback for today's episode. If you're analyzing web traffic, you know that over 30% of your visitors navigate using site search. Funnelback for Higher Education makes search a profitable marketing asset. This flexible, pre-assembled search solution includes sophisticated marketing analytics and accessibility tools out of the box. Funnelback, search like you've never seen it. And Funnelback brings a unique perspective to the topic of breaking down silos in higher ed. So I'm delighted to welcome today's guest, Ben Tilley, who is Vice President for North America at Funnelback, the site search solution. A native of Sydney, Ben moved to Seattle in 2015 to launch Funnelback's operations in the U.S. after nearly a decade with the company. So Ben, great to see you, and thanks so much for tackling this topic with me today.
Great. Thanks, Rob. Thanks for having me here.
Well, you have a really interesting professional trajectory and being newer to American higher education. So I'd love to learn a bit more about what has influenced you along the way. So is there something from your career journey, your career path that has stuck with you, that has had a lasting impact on your professional career?
Yeah, if I think about it, there was something that happened very early on when I started out at Funnelback, and it's probably worth pointing out that Funnelback has worked with higher education organisations since almost day one. We actually started as a university research project, so we've been working with universities for a long time. And I remember a long time ago, I was with my boss at the time. We had a meeting with the university, and once all the regular stuff, all the planned stuff had finished, so we'd presented the product and all of that, and we were just sitting around talking. And one of the guys there just started talking about this challenge that he was facing. It was totally left field. It had nothing to do with our platform, nothing to do with the kind of offering that we were presenting to them, but he was just talking about it as it had been front of mind for him and had been causing him a lot of grief. And my boss actually piped in and said, I know that this traditionally doesn't have anything to do with our platform, but we can actually solve that. We have to bend things a little bit, but we can actually solve that. And I still to this day recall first it was the look of disbelief, slight disbelief, followed by a complete look of relief on his face when he realized that this problem that sat out there that had been, causing him gray hairs was actually solvable. And I think that's really stuck with me. And it's kind of always, been sitting there in the back of my mind. What other challenges do people face that they may see as, these insurmountable obstacles that possibly a technology platform or a services offering can be bent to solve? And over the years, we have done a number of those kind of left field type things where we're going outside the box, looking at what people sometimes think is just the normal part of doing business and going, actually, we can fix that. So that's cool. I quite like that. And it's actually fun. As much as our product team or our research and development team hate it when we try and bend things and do these left field things, that's actually the fun side where you're actually sitting there looking at these massive challenges going, actually, how do we mold our platform to solve that? So anyway, yeah, that happened at the very start of my career, and it's certainly stuck with me ever since.
Well, and no shortage of challenges within the higher ed sector. And I think it's interesting, and something I didn't know, that Funnelback started as a university research project, and that's where your origins are. So to pick up on that point a little bit, tell me a little bit more about the history and how Funnelback has evolved during your time.
Yeah, so Funnelback started in the late 90s. So this was even way before my time. Started in the late 90s as a research project into information retrieval. And so our chief scientist, who was the founder of the organization, he was working at a university in Australia at the time, and he was fascinated by information retrieval and a whole range of other things. And so slowly this research project started to develop and evolve, and it ended up getting picked up by an organization in Australia called the CSIRO. Now that organisation is a government-funded scientific research organisation. So they picked up Funnelback, and Funnelback was just a research project operating within that organisation for many years. And then they started to see that there was actually some commercial value in the technology. And of course, along the way, it had started to pick up users and customers of the technology. There were various universities in Australia who had adopted it. There were even organisations outside of universities, banks had started to adopt it as well. And so they ended up creating the entity Funnelback in about the mid-2000s. So very much coming from academic and research roots, and then we were an Australian government entity for a while before then becoming our own private entity.
Wow, that's great. That's great. So I'm sure has informed your perspective, and we want to get to your thoughts again on what you've seen and the changes across higher ed, and particularly comparing your experiences outside of the U.S. to American higher education institutions. But I do want to start with the topic at hand, and that being silos. And it's almost to the point now where you use that word in reference to higher ed, and it's almost a cliche. And whether that's a matter of it's so pervasive in higher ed, or it's just an easy excuse to say, well, we have these silos across the institution or higher ed organization. So really interested in your perspective, your experiences, but just starting with the core of the problem in higher ed silos, how real of an issue is this? Is there a reason to be optimistic that we're turning a corner or have to turn a corner? Or what do you see as the myriad of issues surrounding silos in higher ed?
We definitely see it as being an issue, and particularly what we see are information silos, which I think are an outcome of the organizational silos. So we see both technology silos and then the information that is a part of that technology being siloed off from the rest of the organization. So definitely I would say it is an issue, and it's certainly something we encounter all the time. I would say that for some organizations, it's possibly even becoming even more of an issue, or the silos are becoming even more siloed. And I think a big part of that, there is actually, there's a publication, there's a thing, it's Chief Martech, I think is what it's called. This gentleman, Scott is his name, who runs this website. And over the years, he has been producing, amongst many other things, he's been producing diagrams of all the different pieces of marketing technology out there. I think he calls it the marketing technology landscape. And I remember seeing, I think the first one was maybe 2010, and there were 350 different platforms spanning a series of different categories. And now it is thousands and thousands of different platforms spanning all these different categories. And I think with all this technology that is being developed and these, these differing platforms that are coming out, I think that is, in a way, actually creating more silos from an information perspective. There are more cool, shiny things out there for people to use to achieve their business goals. And because there's so many different options, when you have organizational silos, they're off selecting their own platforms while another silo over here is selecting their own platforms. And so I think in some instances, it could actually be getting worse. How do you see it though? Because you focus a lot more on the organizational silos and the challenges there.
Yeah, it's interesting, the point about the information systems, and ideally we'd have a perfect world where everything's in one system, and we could follow that student journey all the way through as a prospective student, current student, alumni, donor, and whether we're trying to engage an alumna. We can look back and see what her student experiences were and all the things that she was involved with. And I mean, we're making progress in some of those areas, but I think there is a lot of work to do. And you're right, the information silos are a byproduct of the silos of offices and so on. And I think then that gets into issues with just the structure of an organization, and that We're decentralized. Many colleges and universities are very decentralized. We are as a large institution. And so individual academic units are responsible for their own budgets and the ramifications from a budget standpoint of the decisions that they make. So their state of readiness as it relates to an information system may be different than another unit. And so trying to align all those pieces and parts, it becomes a real challenge. And to do so is an organizational effort that unfortunately is slow moving, and a certain school of liberal arts or whomever may not have the time. They need to move. And so all of those moving pieces at different times just makes it really, really hard, and gets back to your point.
Yeah, absolutely.
So other root causes that you've seen, Ben, that all kind of point to this problem or have an effect. I know we want to get to some of the solutions, but want to examine the problem first. And where else do you see some of the things trickling into this overall issue?
Well, I think certainly that going back to the organizational structure is certainly where it seems to start. But, I mentioned that the technology landscape is growing. I think also the ease of adoption of technology also further creates those silos. I know, speaking from my own perspective inside Funnelback, we see a new piece of technology, and sometimes the barrier to adopting that piece of technology is so low, you can do it in an afternoon. But then you've just, in one afternoon, you have created another information silo. And when we're an organization of 40 or 50 people. When you look at an organization the size of a university, you can imagine how easily people can then start creating these little silos around the place.
And mentioning your organization of, say, 40 or 50 people, and you have to not just talk the talk, but walk the walk when it comes to breaking down silos. So even within your company, what are some of the things that you do to avoid having those silos crop up?
Yeah, and I should also say we do have them. They're not as bad as they have been at certain points throughout our history, but we're still guilty of having silos as well, especially because we operate in multiple countries. So our teams over in the UK see the world and the market and what they need to do in a very different way to us here in the US, and again a very different way to our Australian teams. And so that certainly creates silos in itself. We've solved it from a technology perspective, I would say, internally. Bit of a shameless plug, but we use our own search technology internally to try and break that down, and are always encouraging people to use it. In fact, there's a number of people in the organization who their kind of default response to any organization-wide question is actually a link to the search results that shows the answer. So it's about continuously reinforcing that we do have this technology in place to break those silos down. And then I think within our organization, it really does come down to communication, making sure that silos don't have the chance to properly mature and to become completely diverge from everything else that the organization is doing. And then just aligning goals. Everyone knows that we're working towards a common goal, and it's far more efficient for all of us if we work together on this rather than somebody going off doing their own thing because they feel that it's best just for their entity.
I think that's a great point, and perhaps one that's often overlooked is, and for those of us who work in higher education, that's in part the reason why we do what we do, is the mission of the institutions that we work for, and as a starting point to align whoever that colleague or that other office is to establish that common ground around the university mission or the strategic priorities or strategic plan of the institution that everyone can play a part in, because at the end of the day, we're all ultimately driving after the same core goals of our institution. So I think that's a great point, and communication as well. And I want to dig into that a little bit more deeply, and in terms of any specifics or tips or tricks or anything to help enhance the communications, whether that's an ongoing basis to, as you said, try to proactively keep those silos from developing.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's regular communication, but regular structured, but also regular informal communication opportunities. You and I were chatting a little bit before we kicked off the cast this morning, and you were saying how you often bump into colleagues at the Starbucks around the corner, people who are in these other silos, and I think that's great. I think having that informal opportunity to also break down the silos is really important as well. And I think you had a post up on Inside Higher Ed, I believe it was, which talked about regular cross-department lunch meetings. Was that correct?
Yeah, that's right. I think your point is a good one, Ben, that it's both. It's got to be the organic, the everyday ones that happen, but you can't completely leave it to those everyday occurrences. You also need to be very intentional about it. And one of the things that we've tried to, for example, be more intentional about is being a part of search and screen committees, for instance, because those are such a great, they're very time intensive, yes, but they're such a great relationship building opportunity and a way to get become an insider, get behind the scenes for another unit, another office, because those types of things, you really do lift the curtain when it's time to bring in a new leadership position or any sort of position within a unit. So it's a great way to spend your time and strategically be a part of those. I'm serving on one right now, and I've learned more in this period of a month or so about that individual unit than I had in previous number of years working regularly with that unit. So it's a great opportunity, and there's so many things that opportunities that we have, whether it's other committees or opportunities to help colleagues across campus. But again, to your point, it's about that intentionality of it. And you mentioned the Inside Higher Ed post that I did from earlier this year in the spring, and I even point back to one that a colleague at Gettysburg College, Paul Redfern, did in 2015 about breaking down silos. And it was a similar sentiment in that how often do we get the question or ask ourselves or complain, why didn't I hear about that, or something happens, and that's, it's too late, and you can't wait for someone to come to you. You have to be proactive, and that involves being intentional about it. How does that fit into your everyday work, your weekly goals, your monthly, quarterly, annual goals? You just have to make time to do it. So I think we're on the same page, and I'd love to hear from colleagues who are listening in terms of successful things that they've done and ways that they've fostered cross-departmental collaborations and have helped to break down silos with things that they've done, and send us a comment on Twitter using the Higher Ed Live hashtag. We'd love to hear more about other university marketers and what they've done. So the technology piece, and your point that again, it's more than just technology, but where does technology fit in, Ben, in terms of being part of the solution?
Yeah, I think there's a few ways in where it can fit in. My experience and Funnelback's experience has been predominantly focused on search. So, large scale search across departments, across systems, across silos. And certainly I see that as being a way in which you can break down silos, and a way in which you can start to unite that information that gets created by the silos. So bringing it into a central location, I think that's a great way to break them down. In terms of, another example of breaking down silos with technology, and this is actually less to do with having a search technology in place and more to do with giving an organization some understanding. But there was a university that we worked with, we're going back about 3 or 4 years now, actually maybe even longer, maybe 5 years ago. And they were about to go through a massive rebranding process. They wanted to completely rebrand all of their websites, all of the individual college sites, and they wanted to rewrite all of their content too. And yeah, I can see a reaction. It's a big task. Yeah. And I remember it's going back, it's a similar type of situation to what I mentioned when I was talking about, something that stuck with me over the years. This problem came out of, I think, a chat over some coffee or something like that, where they were talking about this. Really doesn't have anything to do with our company in terms of we don't do rebranding, we don't do content writing, but they were just talking about it, and they were talking about how they were looking to recruit a small army of people to start manually going through all of their different websites to just try and work out what they had to perform this massive cataloging operation. And actually, we ended up realizing that we could assist them with that and do some kind of automated auditing. But what came out of that was fascinating. The websites that had sprung up over the past decade that they weren't aware of, people who were publishing research work that they were working on in kind of this tiny little area over here underneath their edu domain that they just had no idea about, systems that had sprung up. And so, performing that kind of task for them and going through that auditing process using technology uncovered so much more than I think they ever thought they'd uncover. I think I remember the figures were, and this was quite a small university, they had maybe 17 or 18,000 pages that they were aware of. I think by the time we finished it, it was getting close to six figures, getting close to 100,000. So there was so much more outside of their area that they just had no idea about. And this was a centralized team too. They were responsible for all marketing and communications across the organization, but these silos had sprung up over the years. So it was a fascinating exercise to be a part of.
And how did it end up? You've got me intrigued. I'm hooked on the story. So and how have they progressed since you've been involved?
They have rebranded successfully and they have rewritten a lot of content, but they've also taken a lot of content down. They've taken a lot of content that had been, replaced by newer things. It's gone. So that actually really assists from an information retrieval perspective, because now they're relatively certain that when someone's coming to their university site and they're looking for information, they're not going to find the 2005 policy, they're going to find the 2017 one, because they've taken this opportunity to then take all of that old redundant information away.
And any other examples that you could share, Ben, from your work with institutions, big, small, in between, anything in between, but I know you have a wealth of experience with all sorts of different types of institutions. So, and you don't necessarily need to name institutions, but still would be very interested in hearing more about experiences that you've seen and how different institutions have worked to address some of the things that we've touched on.
Yeah, sure. There was actually, and this goes outside of breaking down silos within an institution, but there was a service that was running for many years in Australia. And I actually only remembered it this morning and only thought of it this morning and went, oh, actually, that's a perfect example of breaking down silos. And it was a thing called Australia's Knowledge Gateway. And what it was a portal that housed, it was a search portal that housed all of the research published by 8 individual universities in Australia. So essentially, if you took, a cooperative of 8 universities, all of their research was housed in this single portal, and then profiles on all of their researchers were housed in this portal too. And the idea behind that was so that people who needed to find a particular research paper in a particular area, or a particular researcher, perhaps they were looking for a PhD supervisor, they may have been looking for an expert in a very niche field to comment on something or to participate in an industry project. Regardless of the use case, they didn't even need to know which university to go to. They could go to this centralized portal and they could actually get that regardless of where it was. So almost breaking down silos at a higher level, rather than somebody having to know, okay, it's this particular university over here who's got the expert in this really, really niche field. This knowledge gateway sat on top of that and provided that. And that operated for many years in Australia. So I think that's a cool example of, approaching silos in a slightly different way.
And as higher ed marketers, we're all faced with, and as we should be, delivering results for our institution and driving strategic priorities and showing the value of the work that we do and the work that we leave. So connecting all of this to accountability, to measurement, and how do we go about that, or what thoughts would you have on that, and making the connection back to addressing some of these issues, and perhaps it's a way to make the case for addressing some of these issues, but where does this connect back to accountability and measurement for an institution or for an institution's marketing operation?
Yeah, I think accountability and measurement and even tracking ROI is very, very important. It's important to separate out what can sometimes be a little bit of the buzzwords from the actual reality. But we are definitely big believers in accountability and in tracking objectives. I would say certainly with our technology, with our platform, there's a lot there that can be done to track the effectiveness of the interactions that people are having with your information, because that can be very important. You know, you as a university or as a college, when you're getting visitors arriving on your website, you want to make sure that they're actually finding what they came there for. You don't want people sitting there getting frustrated, going, why can't I find this? Or going back to that older example, why can I only find the course information or the degree information from 2005? Where's the 2017 one? So certainly being able to track the success of their interaction with information is important. From an ROI tracking perspective, actually, there is I hope he doesn't mind me mentioning him by name, but there's a gentleman who's been doing some fascinating work from a college in Canada, from the British Columbia Institute of Technology, called Alan Etkin. And he certainly presents at a lot of conferences. I've seen him present at a number of conferences in the past. And what he's been doing is he has actually, I believe he uses Google Analytics for this, has actually started to measure and track the monetary value of interactions that their website users have with their website and with their search technology. So he's able to say that, you know, if we're making this change to the way in which our site's structured, it is going to ultimately result in this much extra in enrollment revenue coming through. Or the other side, it's actually going to drop enrollment revenue coming through. And I know I've tried to sum it up very quickly. It's actually very detailed what he's done, and very fascinating work. And so I think that's very cool when it comes to, you know, tracking the ROI of the work that you're doing, you know, on your websites or various digital platforms.
Well, one of the things that's reinforced from hearing your comments is simply just serving the needs of our audiences and what they want to do, what they want to find in terms of information. But that often gets to the heart of this issue with silos, that again we're organized based on such an organization-centric mentality, and instead of, again, the audience that looks at the institution more holistically and trying to see through the lens of those that we're trying to serve. So going back to this organizational structure point, and I guess going all the way to the top of an organization, where does leadership come into play in trying to help here? And I think of the example that you said with brand strategy and work that we and other institutions do at brand strategy. We know that is an essential piece, an essential ingredient to be successful, is we have to have that support, that advocacy at the top, that it is an institutional priority. And so as it relates to this, any examples or perspectives on where and how leadership can be a champion or advance this cause of eliminating, breaking down, addressing the issue of silos?
I think one of the biggest ways is probably shared goals between organizations, you know, saying rather than, and I know it's challenging because there's a lot more at play with the individual silos. You know, you mentioned budgets, having individual budgets. So that makes things more challenging because individual silos have got their own responsibilities, you know, their own goals that they are responsible for. But shared goals between them can be a great way of breaking them down. And this isn't to do with higher education, but I was at a meetup for various marketing professionals in Seattle a little while ago, and there was a large organization there that was talking about how they have broken down the traditional silos in their organization. And they had a traditional silo between and this is why I say it's not to do with higher education. They had a traditional silo within their sales team and within their marketing team. And, you know, each of those teams, each of those silos saw themselves as completely separate. They had, you know, ultimately separate goals and separate areas of responsibility. And what this organization did, what the leadership at the organization did to break that silo down, is he said, actually, you now share goals. So you now are both responsible for achieving this goal, and it's not something that one of you can achieve and not something that you can achieve by yourself. So you have to start working together. And that was a way of starting to break those silos down. So if something like that could be applied in higher education, I think that could be a fantastic way to at least get things started.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And with organizational structures, I'm also curious if you've seen any models that have been more conducive to helping address the issue, and even so, how might institutions outside of the U.S., are there differences in that you've seen in structures and how colleges and universities outside the U.S. organize themselves in ways perhaps differently than U.S. institutions do?
I would say certainly with my experience with Australian and New Zealand universities, If we look at it purely from, say, a marketing communications perspective, there is very much a centralized team that does have central responsibility over that area of technology. So I think looking at it purely from just a technology or an information silo point of view, that having a strong central team that is given the remit and has full control is, well, you completely eliminate the silo when that happens. It doesn't change the organizational silos, because you still do have those other areas within the organization, that's where it's sitting outside technology and information, where there are silos. But, that's what we see a lot of in Australia, are those, those centralized marketing, communication, digital IT teams that really do progress an institution-wide vision and institution-wide goals. And so that's certainly a structure that we've seen, and one that does break down those silos. Now, actually, prior to our podcast today, one of my colleagues who went to American University in Washington, DC, sent me over an article where they have talked about the structures that they've put in place to break down silos. And I thought that was quite interesting too. So some of the things that they've done to break them down are, first of all, they have all faculty and graduate students can access all research across colleges and departments. So really trying to facilitate that cross department communication and shared resources. They have steering committees that bring together representatives from all the colleges. I actually noted this down, which is why I keep looking off to the side. So they have steering committees that bring together these, representatives from all of the individual colleges to discuss their academic technology strategies. So rather than letting people go off and make their own decisions, they try to focus everybody on a strategy at the institution level. But with that being said, there was a stat here that I noted down that I thought was really interesting. One of the provosts over there noted that the university utilizes more than 36 databases for different student-related administrative and learning management functions. But there is little or no integration between these discrete data elements. So I think that's a perfect example of an information silo, or set of information silos right there. So yeah, that's something that I thought was fascinating, how they were trying to tackle that problem and the different measures that they put in place to do so.
Yeah, and a great example of simply just sharing having that the research example, having that available across the institution, and just the access to information. And even thinking of one more example from the article that you referenced from Inside Higher Ed, I touched on a story when I worked on another campus of our institution, a smaller campus. And one summer, our team, we used the old Google 20% time program that I tried to apply it in a way that worked for us. And so I had every staff member spend 3 to 5 days total over the course of the summer exploring a project related to the university, but a project outside of their job description, something that they were interested in or passionate about. And it was fascinating, the myriad of items that people explored, from career services and sustainability and dining services and mentoring and counseling. And the end result, we had folks who had better relationships across the campus, but also people who had a much better understanding of other areas, and just were better informed and better able to see the institution more holistically. So there's so many ways, big and small, that we can begin to address that problem. And I want to ask, before we close, Ben, if there's anything else along those lines, or even thinking of someone who might feel overwhelmed with the silos that exist within their institution, and perhaps some initial steps that they could take, or some recommendations that you might have to at least begin on that path.
Yeah, I might, before I talk about that, I might actually jump back, because when you were talking about the Google Time policy that you put in place, that just reminded me of something that happened within our company and our parent company, which really did break down silos. And it would have been maybe about a year or two ago now, the organization, we are part of a larger company, so there's probably about 500 of us globally, they decided to hold a hack day. And I know hack days were all the rage for several years. Organizations are still holding them. And that really did break down silos. And it was fascinating to see. So we had this system internally where, people could post. It was, essentially almost like a ticket tracking system where people, or / forum, where people would post and go, okay, prior to the hack day, this is my idea. These are the kinds of people that I would need to help me execute on this idea. Who's interested? And it was fascinating. We had teams being made up of, there were people here in our Seattle office that were collaborating with people in the Polish office, because there's an office in Poland, but then also had people in Australia and New Zealand. And these are, very traditional silos, these regional-based silos, all collaborating with the aim of producing this, cool solution to a problem faced across the business. And so firstly, just by getting the people together, I think that broke down the silos, but then also the solutions that were being produced, a lot of them were focused on breaking down silos. And actually, one of the very big solutions that got put together was a much more kind of coherent and cohesive search solution across the entire organization, because our parent company does a lot more than just what we do. But even across that, there were these information silos. And so that was one of the cool things to come out of it as well. There was another solution that came out of it, which was consolidating and then also creating consistent customer stories across the organization. So people in our UK operation were able to talk to the universities they're working with about the cool stuff that people in our New Zealand operation are doing. So yeah, that was a great way to break down the silos. And as you were talking through your Google time example, it kind of triggered my memory of that. But the
That's
other
great. Appreciate sharing.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, go ahead, please.
I was going to say the other question you asked, which was what can people do to get started? Yeah. I actually think it goes back to what I've been mentioning, what I mentioned earlier on about these problems that people have that they might often seem insurmountable. I think people would be surprised about how many of their colleagues share these common challenges that there may actually be a solution to, and it could just be a solution that requires a little bit of collaboration across silos, but could fix a whole range of issues that people are currently grappling with. And I think what you've said about those informal opportunities is a great way to raise those, catching up over lunch or meeting people in Starbucks or just catching up with people outside of your department to find out what is it that's troubling them at the moment. Because if you can come up with a common solution, that can be a great way to start breaking down those silos.
Yeah, that's terrific. And as marketers, that's one of the advantages that we have in our work covers so many facets of the institution, and in many cases we can serve in that role as the connector, because we see things more broadly that perhaps those sitting within their individual offices or academic schools and colleges don't have the ability to see. So the onus is on us to help and play a leadership role in this. So you've given us lots of great advice and some resources to point to. So really appreciate the discussion, Ben, and your sharing your experiences and expertise with us today.
No, it's been great. Thank you.
As always, we appreciate M. Stoner for making Marketing Live possible, and thanks as well to Funnelback for its partnership for today's episode. Be sure to get reminders about this and other episodes by subscribing to the Higher Ed Live newsletter. You can browse the video archives at higheredlive.com or subscribe to the podcast. I'm Rob Zinkin. Thanks again to Ben Tilley as well. We appreciate you tuning in to Marketing Live on the Higher Ed Live Network.